Hi, I am Lowell Joseph Gallen, and our guest for this interview is my old friend Dr. Sam Minskoff. Dr. Sam, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to be back.
That's a beautiful jacket that you're wearing. A leather jacket?
Yes.
A real leather jacket?
A real leather jacket, genuine goatskin.
Goatskin, a U.S. Air Force bomber's jacket?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Now, when you're wearing a leather jacket, I recommend that if you go to a restaurant, if you don't get like a coat check, don't leave it on the rack, because it might not be there when you get back.
Or make sure you get a ticket, and if they don't retrieve your jacket, because they're supposed to you're supposed to check the code
right.
in. If they don't, then someone in the restaurant is in trouble.
Right.
So we wouldn't want that.
As a matter of fact, there was an incident with someone I knew a couple of years ago who went, someone who was living here, was left the country. He was a visiting foreign personnel, and he was at a conference in Belgium with Israeli members of the Knesset, and he put his coat, he had a beautiful leather jacket, I think, he put it on the rack, and it wasn't there when he got back, and it turned out it had been lifted by a Knesset member. He got it back, there was a little bit of a diplomatic flurry, and the Knesset member said he had taken it by mistake. Okay, as the Talmud says, teku, let it stand. Dr. Sam, could you tell us something about your beautiful leather jacket, and that it's a bomber jacket?
Right.
A real U.S. bomber jacket?
Right. It started, like this particular style, this issue, it started way back, well, in World War II. It's called an A2 flight jacket. It was made out of leather, goatskin, because goatskin is soft and also very strong, and it keeps you very warm, because the cockpits in those days were freezing cold, so it kept the pilots warm. They had a scarf on, and naturally the hat. Now, as time went on, they discontinued this particular issue because it was flammable, and it was a high-risk sort of situation. So they wore sort of like an asbestos or a nylon, something that was a little less flammable. But in recent times, I think, well, not so recent, 10, 15, or 20 years ago, they reissued the old traditional A2 flight jackets. Which is the same. It's the same model, but it's not. This is not from World War II per se, but it's the same design.
Okay.
As a tradition.
The name A2, does it have a meaning? I mean, sure. Do you know what the meaning is?
I'm
A2.
Not, probably A2.
Army 2. Well, it'd be Air
it might
Force
be. Well,
then.
see, years during World War II, it was actually called the Army Air Force.
Okay.
They were combined.
I know that.
But A2, I think it's just it's probably a code number for a particular garment. A could very well mean Air Force or Air Person or whichever, and two, I don't know, but the A2 flight jacket, when the people were lining up to get their uniforms and get their issue clothing, they would A2. This is what it was, and if you ever look at old World War II movies, like for example. The Best Years of Our Life. There was a character, Captain Fred Derry. He wore something very similar, almost exactly the same.
I have to add a footnote here, Dr. Sam.
Yeah.
Sam, you mentioned old movies. The Talmud says, he who is ashamed will not learn. And I've had to say that many times in the last year since I started acting after 40 years since high school and got a new beginning with film. So my producers and directors, I call them Lowell's kids, most were young enough to be my kids and my grandkids, and we started to talk about movies, except there was a problem, because I haven't really seen any since Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, and what was the other one? My Fair Lady, that's about 1964. The kids said, you got to see some movies. And so Dr. Sam is referring to a movie that I don't know. That's even from the old days, before my days. I didn't see that either. So one year, someone out there, you got a foundation, I need a paid sabbatical for 1 year where I can go to like an estate in Tuscany, that's a nice part of Italy, with all these old videos and DVDs, and spend the year just watching movies. Does anyone want to fund me to do that? Let me know. Okay, Dr. Sam, tell me again, what was the name of that classic you mentioned from World War II, was it made?
Yeah, it was made right after World War II,
okay.
1946. So, I mean, here it is. It was a period movie made in that period
itself. What was the name again?
It was The Best Years of Our Life.
And starring?
It was starring Dana Andrews,
I heard
Frederick
her.
March,
I didn't hear him.
Virginia Mayo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Harold Russell. Now, Harold Russell was a very interesting character because he plays a character in World War II who was on a flat top, a CB.
What's a CB?
A CB is a flat top, and that's where the planes would take off. It was a Navy, kind of like a sort of the Navy Air Force, the planes would take off, do their missions, and land. It was like a runway in the middle of the ocean, like a runway boats,
right,
so to speak. And his ship was blown up by the Japanese, and his hands were burnt off. And in the movie, he has these hooks. And in real life, he didn't have any hands. But that's not how we lost him in real life. Later on, after the movie, in fact, he won. I believe he was either nominated or he won an Oscar for that role. And later on, he went on to head one of the Veterans Administration, on disabled vets and all that. He really did a remarkable job, managing his life with these synthetic cans or hooks. I hate to call them that, they're crude, but that's what they had. Of course, today they have actually
biomechanical
hands.
limbs.
Yeah. They have hands today that they have digits.
Dr. Sam knows a lot about film history, which isn't surprising because he spent many years, even though he's a New York boy like me, he spent many years living and working in Los Angeles, Hollywood, Tinseltown, so he knows. He's also a scholar who researches subjects in depth. So he knows these. I'm supposed to learn. I'm supposed to know this stuff. Like I told my kids, just give me a few hundred years. I'll get from 1964 to 1970. I'll see a few movies, then we'll have something.
It's a significant movie because it's about these. It's a vignette. This Air Force guy, this Army individual, and this Navy guy who lost his hands, and he comes back with the hooks. He's coming back to his old girlfriend, kind of wondering how he was going to be responded to and all that. But here they are. They've been away for 2, 3, 4 years in World War II, and now they're coming home, and you see how they're transitioning. And each one has a completely different life. One was this middle to upper middle class banker. The other one was a poor guy living on the poor side of the tracks, literally, some railroad depot where you can hear trains going by all the time. And the other one was sort of middle class, and how they transitioned and how they adjusted and adapted back to civilian life. I highly recommend it. From Here to Eternity. No, not From Here to Eternity. That's another World War II picture. Post World War II, and that's where Frank Sinatra starred in it, and it put him back on top. But that's another story. But best years of our life.
1946. This is a good example of art in the service of humanity. That sounds too grand. Movies reflecting real life and dealing with real issues that people had, mostly men coming home from the war and starting lives like my father, who was a captain in World War II. A few years later he married my mother, and then he opened his law firm. That was in the early 1950s in the South Bronx. El Barrio, Fort Apache, and then along came my sister and along came me. So that's the kind of movie I like because if it's done right, helps people deal with real issues. So it's great to know about that. One thing I do know is one of my favorite actors, and actually pretty much everybody is my favorite actor because everybody's good at something, I think, is James Stewart, Jimmy Stewart. James Stewart became a general in World War II. As Dr. Sam says, I didn't realize that. I didn't know we didn't have a separate Air Force. We had, I guess it would have been the Army Air Corps, which is
combined, like the Army
different from the Germans, where they had a separate Air Corps, the Luftwaffe under Hermann Göring, who had been an air ace in World War I, and they were organized very differently.
And then their army, what they call the Wehrmacht.
The Wehrmacht. But they didn't realize that in the U.S. Army, there was no separate Air Force at that point. Let's go back to your jacket for a second. So the first A2 jacket, this is the model,
right,
but it's redesigned so it's not flammable.
Right.
It'd be the same, more or less the same design, but it's not going to burn up.
Well, okay, I'm not saying this is not flammable. It's flammable, but now they have taken precautions in the cockpit so that a fire would be unlikely. But it was more of a traditional situation to bring back the old A2 Air Force bomber jackets, because there's a lot of like in the Navy, the sailors are permitted to have beards
now, Not in my father's day, not in World War II.
Providing that they're cut a certain way or manicured, properly, because it's more of a traditional thing. You can't have this long, kind of like a Santa Claus kind of beard, because why? It'll get in the way of, whatever it is that you need to do. But the so-called bomber jacket has been traditional, and they brought it back. They brought it back, I believe, in the 80s, the early 90s, and I think it's still there to this very day. But it is waterproof. They do put a special coating on it, so even though it's leather, you can walk in the rain with it. It will get wet and it will dry like cloth.
I think that the leather jacket, the bomber jacket, is pretty much universal in most air forces. If I think of old photos of Ezer Weitzman and the first pilots in 1948 with the new state of Israel, who were either flying Spitfires left over by the British, or surprisingly Messerschmitts, which we got through the Czechs thanks to Robert Maxwell of blessed memory. Got the arms for the Haganah from the Czechs, who were the only ones willing to supply us openly and legally. So we got that old German World War II equipment, so they were flying Messerschmitts. Where there's another story at the end of the war, when the German production was moved underground as the Allied bombing intensified, a lot of those Messerschmitts were built by slave labor, including Jewish slave labor. So in the strange twists of fate, Messerschmitts designed and built by Jewish, among other slave labor, in underground factories in Austria, Germany, and then Czechoslovakia, ended up in the service of the new state of Israel. But I get the impression that till today there's a certain romance associated with the bomber jacket, and then you put on your shades and you have that hat.
The glory flyboys. Now the Navy.
What's glory flyboy means? I don't know.
Well, there was something romantic about being a bomber pilot, and they apparently what this movie showed is that they had a
What's the name of it again?
The Best Years of Our Lives.
The Best Years, 1946, with Dana Howard?
Dana Andrews.
Sorry about that, Dana Andrews.
He especially had a difficult time adjusting, because it was more of a glory, to be a fly.
Why, he had really been in the Army.
Well, I don't know if he really been in the Army in real life, but he played this.
His character.
Right, his character. He played this. He played this hero. His plane was on fire, and he managed to, under a wound and heavy fire and pain, he managed to save the crew of his ship, and he got citations from General Doolittle, at the time. But when you go from this glory, romantic flyboy, hero, the angels of the sky type, to go back to Earth, when they get grounded, they had a difficult kind of an adjustment. But now Frederick March, his character, he was a sergeant. To quote him, he says, now when you've been in the infantry, anything is bound to be an improvement. But I want to say something else about the flight jacket. The Navy had something very similar to this, except they had the fur or the wool collar. The fleece, they had the fleece lining, because you're on ship, it's cold, the wind and the breeze from the sea. They had the fleece lining and the fleece collar. And those look great, and they'll definitely keep you warm.
Dr. Sam, who we usually talk about psychology, today we're talking about jackets and U.S. cultural and military history, mentioned Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle, Colonel James Doolittle, in 1942, leads the raid on Tokyo. America badly needed a victory after Pearl Harbor, and one of the first victories was to launch from aircraft carrier James Doolittle's raid on Tokyo. They fly in unintercepted and undetected by the Japanese. It was primarily a psychological victory. The Japanese thought that their island was invincible and untouchable, and they were very shocked that American bombers could get through and bomb a little bit of Tokyo, then flew over on their way to China. Some ditched in the ocean. Others did reached China, where Chinese civilians saved the pilots, and the Japanese responded by mass murder and massacre of I don't know how many Chinese in retaliation for that. But Dr. James Doolittle led that raid, and it was as important for the U.S. war effort in World War II as General Washington's victory at Trenton over the Hessians in Christmas Day, if I'm not mistaken, 1777, America was losing to the British.
Or 1777.
1777, we were losing. Mainly the way we won the revolution.
We lost most of the battles, but we won the ones that counted.
We won the ones that counted, and the American forces just kept retreating and avoiding battle, and the British couldn't catch them. And then they had a global war with the French. They didn't have any time left or money left for this. They just gave up and threw in the towel and said, let's make a peace treaty.
Right.
They surrendered at Yorktown and left. So America needed that victory in the Revolution, and we desperately needed that victory in 1942. In those years, we had the British victory.
But George Washington did allow the enemy to save face. When General Cornwallis surrendered his sword, because that's the custom, Washington allowed him to keep his sword.
He was a gentleman.
Because that's, you know, a sword, that's like an honor. That's your sword. You know, you earned that. And he says, you know, keep your sword. Just don't bother us anymore.
Well, we have on Friday, we have to conclude our interview now, we have the so-called Mayan apocalypse coming up on Friday. Let us hope that whatever's coming after that day, whether it's a world-transforming experience in the sense, hopefully, that bad things won't happen. One thing is true. There is a unique astronomical event that occurs only once every 11,500 years. That's
I remember the last one, don't you?
My memory fails me,
Yeah.
Dr. Says. Not as good as yours.
I'm still recovering.
And we'll have to wait another 11,500 years for the next one. So let's hope that there'll be no more wars, and there'll be worldwide disarmament, and there'll be more movies like that, The Best Days of Our Lives, as old soldiers never die, they just fade away. My father retired as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's 92 now, going on 16. And let's hope that worldwide armies everywhere, including here, people are able to go home. And there'll be a lot of good books and movies and TV series and internet channels established to help people stop fighting and killing each other. So, Dr. Sam, thank you very much for this fantastic interview.
Anytime.
And thanks to our viewers for watching.